All right. Audacity, how we going? Yes, we got it working this time. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. I originally had planned on doing this last Sunday, and my outline was stuff on the Democratic primaries and impeachment, and then today, or not today, yesterday, I was going through and just making sure, okay, do I have everything I want in here? And I put the date on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the 29th. It's the last Return to Reason live stream of 2019. And so I was like, shoot, I should probably engage in that reality a little bit. And so I completely redid my whole outline yesterday and worked on it today. And so I think it's good. But either way, it's not just any other podcast. It's the last one of 2019, so I guess that's kind of a big deal. As for those of you that are watching and not listening, since we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts now, which we'll talk about that later, you can see that we do have another venue change. I'm in my in-laws' garage. They were kind enough to let me do that over Thanksgiving, and so that's where we are this time. What was funny is I just did a run-through of the whole thing, of my stream, or my outline, and I kept trying to pick at this thing on the screen. I'm like, what is stuck to my phone? And then I finally realized that it's a screw hole behind me in the wall. But I was seriously, I'd be in the middle of it, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And I was freaking out. This is a stupid screw hole. So that's where I'm at mentally. So get excited. Anyway, so it's the last one of the year. So here's where we're going. I'll tell you kind of where we're at with the channel, where we're at with just my content generally. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going, and we're going to cover just some general end of the year stuff. So, I started making videos right after, thank you. I started making videos right after the Parkland school shooting, and there was just some things I was frustrated about, and I was doing it, I had PowerPoint, and I was using this Adobe Media Editor, and was putting in all these jump cuts and everything, and it was taking a lot of time, and I liked what I was doing with it, but I was also just putting a lot of work in the production side of it for not a lot of output, because I don't have a lot of training in that. You can go back and look at my old videos on my YouTube channel to see what I'm talking about. And then the computer I was doing that on took a dump, and it wasn't working anymore. And so I wasn't able to make content anymore, but I still kind of had that itch, to... Okay. I still felt like I had something to say, and whenever I started at the end of this last summer, I guess it was about 5 months ago, I was like, how can I do this in a way that doesn't have that same burden? And so I started I'm just going to stream this on my podcast. And that was actually a really good process for me. I'll do it in my Jeep. I've done it, with my bathroom shower curtain as a backdrop. I'm in the garage, whatever. But it's still been a pretty good process, and I've just really tried to have as substantive as content as I can, because the production that good, obviously, screw holes in the back, doing it on my phone, whatever. But I've really been trying to, this is what's on my YouTube channel, and then we'll kind of tease this out a little bit. What's on the description of the channel is it says, trying to bring reason and civility into an increasingly unreasonable and uncivilized world. And that's been my mission this whole time. And as I was thinking about, I guess we're supposed to have New Year's resolutions, that at the end of the year, that's pretty normal. And so what's been just kind of elevating the quality of discourse rather than just adding to the noise, to the quantity. And so, if you're to look at, especially because of social media, and, well, mainly exclusively because of social media and, things like YouTube and just the internet generally, the quantity of discourse, of conversation, has just expanded exponentially, right? There is so much happening in terms of just discussion on these things. Now, I wouldn't say it's discussion. It's really just kind of yelling and stuff, and people trolling each other and treating each other generally horrific, because that's what the internet is. It's a big old dumpster fire of dirty needles and human feces. I mean, it's horrible. It's San Francisco, I guess, but probably dirtier. But the is that the quantity it's skyrocketed, but the quality has... it's kind of like, I guess, Adam Sandler movies, right? The more we see of them, the worse they become. Although I've heard Uncut Gems is pretty good. the point is that what I've decided, what I really want to do specifically is upgrade the quality of discourse without just adding to the quantity. We have enough noise out there. We have enough people arguing and yelling and being rude to each other. I want to add quality to the discourse, and not just quality of information. I really try to stick to the facts, stick to what's true, measurable, observable, but just quality in the way that it's packaged and delivered. And that means adhering to principles of charity, of goodwill, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, trying to see things from, what is the perspective of the other side on this, and straw manning everything I disagree with, and not just engaging in ad hominem and personal attacks. So that's what I've been trying to do, since I first started, and then again since I started doing this again, maybe 5 or 6 months ago. So what I really just wanted to say is that, since that happened, let's say 5 months ago, is when I first started getting back into it, I had a couple of YouTube subscribers and I had a couple followers on Twitter. And where I'm at now, it's still very modest in both of those realms, and we'll see where the Spotify and the Apple podcast goes. But what I really want to say is I'm just thankful for those of you that have come along with me on this journey, for the subscribers I do have, for the people that watch these streams on Facebook, for the people that watch it on YouTube, or who engage in conversations on Twitter or whatever. I just really appreciate that, and I hope that continues to grow. I'm going to keep trying to make quality content, or as quality as I can, right? And I'm going to keep trying to be principled and honest, and I just am thankful for those of you that decide to go on that journey with me and want to engage in that elevation of discourse, again, quantity, not just adding to the noise. And so I want you to come with me. If you see me straying from that, especially going to the new year, call me out on it. Tweet at me, say, hey dude, this is messed up. If you just listen to my podcast on Spotify, say you said this thing, you were misrepresenting this position. I'm always open to that. Drop a comment in YouTube. To continue to try to do, and I just want to say I'm really thankful for those of you that have joined me in this, and who are hopefully going to keep doing this into the next year and into this really important election cycle. So that's what we're going to say is, if you like to read stuff, if you for whatever reason like what I'm saying, if you like the perspective that I'm bringing, I write quite a bit on. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dave Rubin's website later on, but I'm a contributor on there, and so there's a lot of, whether it's just articles that I comment on or just bigger think pieces, there's a lot of writing that I have built up on my my Google Drive. And another person on Rubin's website suggested that I find an outlet where I can put that out there that's not just on his website, and so I've Medium account set up when I uploaded my first thing there, and so I'm going to put a description, probably, or a link to Medium, start putting it in my YouTube videos, and probably on Facebook, and I'll see if I can find a way to fit it in my Twitter bio. I'd rather not, because I really like my Twitter bio, but we'll see. But the point is that I'm going to find a way to put my writing out there, and a lot of it's stuff that doesn't make it into any of my streams. It might just be something that I've been thinking about, or it's a commentary on a specific article. Some of it's stuff that you might get a very might tweet out the article, here's what I think. But if you do like reading some of that stuff, I'm going to have that. You'll have access to my written works are going to be on the internet. So anyway, that's going to be in there as well. So that's stuff to look forward to. I need to getting that stuff uploaded and edited to format for that website. It's on my ever-growing to-do list, but that's another thing that's happening. So the podcast or watching on YouTube, on Medium, I'm really trying to get more content out there for you to engage with, and for people, just so you know what I'm thinking, or if you think like me, whatever, and that you can give me feedback on as well. So anyway, thank you. Now let's do the actual broadcast here, right? It's enough of this stupid Oscar acceptance speech that I got going on here. Okay, so here's where we're going. We're going to talk about where the Democratic primaries are generally. I'll talk about the debate a little bit, but we'll say here's where they're at going into 2020. Where do the candidates stand? We're also going to talk about impeachment and just kind of what's happening there. There is this stuff where Nancy Pelosi isn't sending the articles over to the Senate, and I think that she's not getting enough credit for this move. There's a lot of people that are saying it's stupid, and I think that that's totally wrong. I think that she deserves a lot of credit. It's actually, I think, kind of brilliant. And then lastly, I'm going to give some 2020 thoughts. I'll say, here's the things that I'm worried about going into 2020. So what are some trends that I think are, if they continue, are going to be really harmful going into the next year? What are some I'm optimistic about? That's a much shorter list, but I really tried to make it. So I'll have that, the things I'm optimistic about in 2020. And then just some predictions, we'll say these are some models of here's what could happen. I've got, I think, 5 possible scenarios, mostly revolving around the 20. We'll say I'll throw those out there and say here's some things that could happen and what impact they might have, and that's where we'll close it out. So in terms of the Democrat primaries, so if you can go back and watch the video I made of what I was looking for in those primaries, and so I'm not going to go back over all of the things I was hoping to see. I'll touch on maybe 1 or 2 of those things, but I'll just say this is where it generally stands. I'll say here are the winners, here are the losers, right? That's the list that people make. So the winners debate, and who I think are probably going to have the momentum going into 2020. First and foremost, Amy Klobuchar. She's the one who saw the biggest engagement of people that were interested in voting for her. She saw the biggest bump in that. Her poll numbers went up after the primary, and so she's got a good amount of momentum going into 2020, going into that next debate. And mostly the main thing for her is Iowa. She's looking forward to Iowa. She basically can't see past Iowa. So she went after Pete Buttigieg. She got more speaking time. So in case you forgot, that last Democrat debate only had 7 people on stage. So there are people that got more of a chance to talk that didn't previously. So that's Amy Klobuchar, that's Andrew Yang, that's Tom Steyer. They were able to talk more than they had before because it was such a smaller stage. So Klobuchar did good. Her numbers increased quite a bit relative to where she was. I think she's in. So she did good. She has momentum going into the next year. So she was a winner. Pete Buttigieg, I say, is also a winner. There's a lot of people that say he came out of that debate that he didn't do well. And one of the reasons that is Klobuchar went after him and said, look, dude, you've been saying that all the experience hasn't done anything, and you only got 8,000 votes in your mayoral. Like, who are you to say anything about our experience? Like, you're elected. That's a fair point, but all Pete Buttigieg really needed to do in that debate was maintain and be durable because of how well he's doing in the Iowa polls and how well he's doing in New Hampshire. I think he's in first in Iowa and maybe second in New Hampshire. I haven't looked at Real Clear Politics as of today, but he's still doing well, and his numbers didn't really change much after that debate. And so even though Klobuchar went after him, I think that made him look really good was whenever Elizabeth, but when she tried to go after him about, meeting with billionaires or whatever, that he said, look, you have 100 times the wealth that I have. And this is the problem with purity tests that you can't yourself pass, And so basically he did a really good job deflecting and really counterattacking the main attack against him of the night. I think that he is in the group of winners and not losers. He might have taken a few dings as a result of it, but I think generally he did well. And you can look at his numbers in Iowa. He's still doing great in Iowa. He's still number 1. His numbers in New Hampshire, he's still doing good. His general polling numbers haven't really changed much, maybe down by like 1 or 2 points, or 0.1, 0.2. So he's kind of like Joe Biden. He's next on my list of winners. Just had to be durable, just had to maintain the attacks, which is why Buttigieg, I put him in the winners, and why Biden, I think, is also a winner. He had a great debate night. His gaffes were to a minimum. The main gaffe where it was like he did an impression of a stuttering person, it looked really bad if you didn't know, but evidently he suffered from a stutter his entire life. And so that was just a point he was trying to make of people were coming up to him and saying that. But I still don't think it looked good. There's people justifying that, but whatever, that's fine. So Biden did well. His numbers, I think, also went up a little bit. His engagement went up a little bit. People interested in him went up a little bit. Another person who was a winner was Sanders. Bernie did great in this debate. It was his best debate by far. He had energy. Like Joe Biden, one of the metrics for them for success is, did you die on stage or not? or did you appear to be dead on stage or not? And Biden did good there, and Bernie did good there. Bernie had a lot of energy. He was cracking jokes, so it was probably his best debate that he's had. I think that he saw a decent bump afterwards as well in Iowa, New Hampshire, and generally. I don't think he went up a lot generally. I think he's maybe sitting around 18, 19%. But still, he did good. He did really good. So good for Bernie. And part of that, honestly, again, is I think that Bernie is authentic in that I really think that he believes what he's saying. I think there are people in his movement that understand why some of those policies are bad and they don't care. But I think that Bernie really does. I think he's sincere, even if I think he's wrong on a lot of his policies. And that authenticity will carry you a long ways. And as long as you maintain it and you have that charisma, and again, you don't appear to die on stage. So he did a good job. The last one who I say is a winner from this is Donald Trump. One of the reasons for that is that debate happened during that week of like the impeachment and when they voted on it and all that. And so Trump's poll numbers, if we're talking about poll numbers here, they went up. They went up during that week as well. They went up. They were up after the debate. They were up after the impeachment stuff. And so I think if we're talking about poll numbers, we have to say Trump is also a winner from this because he didn't get hurt. People, they have all these people on stage. It was the most substantive debate that they've had. And he's still looking better and better to the American voters. Now, obviously, the election's a long ways out. In the same week where there was the most substantive Democrat debate and there was a vote for impeachment against him in the House of Representatives, his poll numbers went up. His approval rating was the highest it's ever been. So you have to say that in some way, he's a winner from either that week generally or from this Democrat debate. But either way, his poll numbers are better than they've ever been. So here are the losers. Elizabeth Warren. So what I said before the debate, this is one of the ones where I'll say, here's what you need to do. I said she needs to change something because her numbers are plummeting, her policies suck. One way to tell kind of where she was at during this debate. So Saturday Night Live did their about the debates. And Kate McKinnon, I think, is the one who's Elizabeth Warren. And what she said, so this is after this debate, part of the skit was, last time talked about my policies and now it's time to walk it back. And, they acknowledge basically like her policies are garbage. They're not good. The more, Miss, I got a plan for that. The more we learn what her plans for that are, the less popular she becomes. And so not the last one, but the one before that, she spent the whole debate defending her wealth tax, and it did not do anything for her because the wealth tax is bad. There's no defending it. And so she had to do something different in this debate, and she did. And that's what I said she needed to do something. I didn't know if it was going to be effective. She did. She hammered home corruption. Everything was about fighting corruption, and corruption this, corruption that. So fair enough, she tried a different message, and she stayed on message. But it didn't really work. It didn't work. And there was two things that happened during that debate that you could say these are specifics, and then just generally why she was such a loser, and then the evidence to back up why or how we know that she's plummeting, or one of the ways. Is so she went after, like I said, Pete Buttigieg, and she's like, well, he had a fundraiser in a wine cave, and, Wine Cave is trending on Twitter, and he's like, look, you're worth $12 million. Like, what are you talking about? Why are you coming at me like this? Like, you can't even pass your own purity tests, and what do you care? Like, we shouldn't be turning away any people for fundraising. Like, the individual amount is limited. It's like, I think at $2,800, something like that, that's the most a candidate can receive. It doesn't matter. And Pete Buttigieg went after her. And so if he got damaged a little bit, what I've said is if he got dinged in the debate, Warren got totaled because of that counterattack. He's like, look, you're super rich. What are you talking about? So that's one. And the second one is on policy as well, where the moderators asked Warren, how do you respond? There's a lot of upper level, like top economists who say wealth tax and your policies, they will hurt the economy. Like, what do you say to that? Like, what's your answer to these economists? And Elizabeth Warren said, they're just wrong. And a few people applaud, but it's like, that's not an answer. Like, that's like, if Donald Trump says fake news, and there's people who's like, well, what about it was fake? So that's not really an answer. A few people there that applauded, but most everyone else is like, okay, they're just wrong. Like, they're economists. Like, how would you feel if Donald Trump said that? If a bunch of economists said, hey, your tariffs are really bad, and he said they're just wrong, would rake him over the coals in the media, and for good reason. So it's the same way here with Warren. That answer was really bad for her, and it exposed that she just doesn't have an answer. Like, she has a plan for that, but she doesn't have an answer for that, or at least not a good one. That she wasn't going to go back off of her wealth tax, but what she needed to do was just be likable, because her policies are bad. But look at Bernie. Enthusiasm and authenticity carries a lot of weight. And she wasn't even likable during the debate. She dressed like one of the bad guys from the new Star Wars movie. Nothing about her was likable, and her policies were bad, and her answers were bad, and her attacks on people didn't work. So she is the big loser from that debate, the number one that didn't do anything. And here's one of the ways we know. So, like I had mentioned before, that quarter four for fundraising. So the fundraising for campaigns, corporations, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, or what our numbers are. So quarter four for fundraising, end of this year, fiscal year 2019, ends December 31st. Because the next debate is in February, that's 2 months of the 3 months in quarter one of 2020 that they're going to be fundraising off the momentum of this debate, right? For the most part. Elizabeth Warren's fundraising in quarter four dropped by 30% from where it was in quarter three. So around the same time, so think about it, so Bernie Sanders had that heart attack and her numbers spiked. That was at the beginning of October. And then whenever he did the debate afterwards and was fine, and she revealed her garbage plans, she's been tanking since then, both in the polls and in funding. And so the end of her quarter four is 30% less, and she has nothing carrying her into 2020 or carrying her towards February other than just, the people already with her. She's not bringing people over to her side, basically. So her funding is down by 30%. That's huge. Imagine if a company came out and they said, hey, our profits dropped 30% over, the last 3 months. People would say, what in the crap are you doing at your company? So that's where Elizabeth Warren's at. Her brand, for whatever reason, she's bleeding support. So she's a big loser from that. I think Andrew Yang was so his numbers went up a little bit, but I have him in the losers because he didn't do enough. He did the thing, so unfortunately they asked the impeachment question at the beginning, and what I said was he needs to criticize impeachment. He needs to do what Tulsi did. He needs to do that. And he did. He criticized it at the very beginning, and that gave him a little bit of a bump, right? But the rest of the debate, the whole thing's 3 hours long. So you have to have more that you contribute during that debate than just that good answer. It was a good answer. And unfortunately, he has this double-edged sword of being tethered to UBI as his main policy, which is fine. And so he stays on message. He talks about UBI in most of his answers. But the problem is that UBI... So, people can only handle an answer that's, I'm going to throw $1,000 a month at it for so long before they're like, dude, do you have anything else? Because, Jiminy Christmas. So his numbers went up a little bit, but I don't think they went up the way they needed to. And so I put him in the losers category because I don't know where his fundraising is at. I probably should have checked, but his funding was already down. So I don't think longer, even though a lot of people listed him as a winner. I don't think he is. I put Klobuchar in the losers category as well because she spent more time than she needed to attacking Donald Trump and the Republicans. And I don't say that because I'm like, how dare you? The point is that everyone up there, everyone, we know that you don't like the president. We know that you don't like the administration. And everyone says that. And so you're only different except for all the ways that you're the same, if that makes sense. So if you're saying the same thing as everyone else, then we don't know how you're different. And we don't know how to distinguish you from the other candidates. And one of the ways she'd been doing that was that she hadn't been talking about how bad the orange man is. And she'd just been saying, look, here's my record. Here is what I've gotten accomplished in the Senate. Here are the bills that I've done. And here's why my policies are better than these guys' policies. I already know you're going to vote for a Democrat. Choose me. So she was distinguishing herself from her competition, not talking about how much she didn't like Donald Trump. But they all don't like Donald Trump. So that's not really adding anything. And so she gave enough other good answers that didn't just get lost in the noise. But I think if she continues to do that, that it's not going to be as good because, like I said, if you're only different except for all the ways that you're the same. And so you have to focus as little as possible on the ways that you're the same candidates and focus on how you're different, all right? Because that's the point of those debates. But generally, she did good. That's more of just a pedantic critique of her strategy. So the last loser in the debate that I'll say is the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was the loser. If Elizabeth Warren was the main specific person loser, the Democratic Party was the biggest general loser during this. The main reason for that is twofold. I'd been saying, and I'm going to keep hammering this home because it is the thing that they have to address, is that they didn't address Obama's too far left comments. They've done very little. They basically paid lip service to addressing differences between like the progressive wing and the more establishment centrist wing at these debates. And the last one came on the tail end of Boris Johnson just destroying Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party in the UK's election. So for those of you that don't know, Jeremy Corbyn is basically the Bernie Sanders of the UK. The Labour Party is everything that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party wants to be. It's very far left. And Bernie Sanders, his staffers and his campaign was tweeting out support for Jeremy Corbyn to get people to get out and vote for Jeremy Corbyn in the election. And he got crushed, absolutely crushed. And Labour lost big time. They're going to get through Brexit. And in the wake of that, Jeremy Corbyn, and he stepped down. He said, I'm not going to lead the Labour Party anymore. And there's people in Labour who are saying, we're going to do some soul searching here to figure out why this happened and kind of reorient ourselves because clearly we're off somewhere, right? And they didn't even mention that. They didn't even mention that in the debates. And that, to me, is huge because that election parallels our election and the issues parallel our issues. And by not every single moment they spend not addressing the widening rift in the Democratic Party and the far left is a moment that they are losing. And one thing is fascinating. Whenever I was doing working on this outline, I already had put the Democratic Party as a loser, and then I read this thing about it's like CNN's crystal ball. They do these predictions for then going 2020. So they do this every year. And one of the predictions they make is who's going to win the 2020 election. And over half of the people on their 2020 prediction panel predicted that Donald Trump is going to win the 2020 election. And that includes partisans like Jill Filipovic and S.E. Cupp. And I think S.E. Cupp puts it perfectly, and this is why I say the Democratic Party loses every time they don't do this in a debate. She says, unfortunately, Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States because the Democrats would rather elect the next president of Progressivia. And she's right. I don't know if she's right that Trump's going to win, but there is a widening gap. And every moment that they're not addressing that is a moment that they lose. What's funny is also on the back end of that debate, Huffington Post runs the other side, right, where they say, so their article's titled, yes, it's plainly wrong to meet donors in a billionaire's crystal wine cave. And that sums it up perfectly. In that article, Sanders, they say, Sanders even scrutinizes contributions and returns checks from people who are too rich. So Bernie Sanders, if a wealthy person donates him $50, he'll send it back if it's from a billionaire, even if it's $50. And the fact that they're praising that shows that difference. Where Pete Buttigieg was saying, we should take all the help we can get. Why would I turn down a contribution that's within the legal, limits? And Huffington Post is saying, no, you shouldn't have these fundraisers. This is plainly wrong according to them. And that's what S.E. Cupp is talking about, is that widening rift. And what some of them are starting to realize, and I've said this before and I keep saying this, the vision of governance of Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden is more similar, has more in common with the vision of Donald Trump than it does with Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It just does. It plainly does. That is objectively true. I'm open to, if you think I'm wrong, that's fine. Tell me why. But and Biden have more govern than AOC does. It's just true. Look at the policies. Look at the things that she endorses. But she's in the party with Pelosi, with Joe Biden. And so there is incompatible visions of government in the Democratic Party. And as long as they're not addressing that, they're allowing it to fester and grow, and it's going to make it even harder. Because it's going to have to be addressed. One side's going to win. So that's why I say they lost. They lose every time they don't do that. I'll keep saying that. The last thing I will say is that with the CNN's crystal ball, obviously take that with a grain of salt. I read the one from 2018 of what they predicted for 2019, and I think it was, over half of them also predicted that Beto would be leading the polls for the Democratic primaries right now. So take it with a grain of salt for sure. The last thing with the Democrats is, I mentioned a little bit Deval Patrick. He's the former Massachusetts governor. He's a black guy, so he helps fill in some of that where they're wanting more racial diversity in the candidates in the Democratic primaries. So his campaign isn't even going to be on the ballot in Michigan's primary because of some mix-up where they didn't think they qualified because they weren't in the news enough or something. So there's some kind of chaos going over at Deval Patrick's campaign before he even is in a debate at all. He's not going to be on Michigan's primary. That's a big deal. So I think he's gone from the beginning. The fact that he hasn't been in the news very much kind of already indicated that to me. But anyway, that's just kind of a fun kind of side note. So basically what we see is what we have. We'll see how, not Bill de Blasio, Bloomberg does whenever he's in a debate. The dude's polling at like 6%, 5% right now, which is crazy. So anyway. So that's where it ends up. Again, the next debate's not until February 3rd, so we'll see what happens. But that's where the primaries are. Okay, so impeachment. So this is kind of interesting. This is the part, I hate that this is like at the very beginning because this is the part that I'm like most interested in. For the first time, right? It took Nancy Pelosi doing something random to get me interested in this impeachment stuff. So let's do a quick run through of what happened and where we are right now, and then kind of tease out what it means maybe, or what's behind it. So the Democrats had this impeachment inquiry in the House of Representatives, and they call witnesses, and they have testimony, and then at the end they say we're going to pass these articles of impeachment, obstruction of Congress, and I think it's like corruption is the other one, or abuse of power maybe, something like that. And part of the process in the House of Representatives is that calling of witnesses. Now, the executive branch, the president can say, I don't think those are valid witnesses. We reject those subpoenas, and then it goes to the courts. The courts decide. So this, from what I understand, the same thing happened under Fast and Furious with Barack Obama, where he said no, and they kicked it over to the courts. So this is a normal kind of thing, where there's a disagreement between the executive and the legislature, and then the judiciary decides. And once it goes to the courts, the judges can say, yes, these are valid witnesses. Mr. President, you have to abide by these subpoenas. These people have to testify. It's a very normal process. Now, the House Democrats didn't want to wait for the courts. They rejected that. In fact, Adam Schiff explicitly addresses this. This is not just my opinion. He says, for those of you who are saying, why would you wait, or why wouldn't you wait? Why not be patient? He said, look, waiting allows, he said that's the same as asking, why not give him one more time to cheat? Or one more time to Adam Schiff thing. So he says, look for this. This is too urgent. Pelosi says the same thing. It's too urgent. We have it was overwhelming evidence. They vote on impeachment. And what's funny is that, generally the consensus has been it needs to be bipartisan support. The only bipartisan part of this was those who disapproved of the impeachment. There's a few Democrats who voted against. Tulsi Gabbard voted present. No Republicans voted for. You could say Justin Amash, but he's not a Republican. I think he's an independent right now. But anyway, so it's a partisan for impeachment, gets voted in the House. And then it goes to the Senate. And then the Senate looks at the articles, and then they vote. on whether or not he should be impeached. It's like a 2/3 to remove the president from office. So, what did Pelosi do? She said, so they vote, and then she says, I'm not going to give these articles of impeachment. So the physical articles, the document, I'm not going to give these to the Senate. I want to make sure this is going to be fair. You can find video of like after the impeachment of Bill Clinton, they literally walked the paperwork over to the Senate. It was like within 45 minutes or something. So she said, no, I want to make sure it's fair, and I want you to call witnesses. So we would need to know what the parameters are going to be of this thing. It needs to be a fair trial. And Mitch McConnell's like, what are you talking about? This is a political process. We're not jurors. I'm not impartial, just like you're not impartial. This was a partisan effort in the House. Why wouldn't it be partisan in the Senate? What are you talking about? And she says, no, we're not going to send it over. So that's kind of what it stands. And CNN put an article out about this like a couple days ago, maybe a week. And they kind of elucidate it. So this is what they say, quote, a week since the impeachment vote, there's no sign of a break in the Christmas impasse over how and when his impeachment trial will transpire. Democrats have demanded to know the parameters of the trial before sending over their articles of impeachment, and have made clear they believe it should include witnesses. Republicans, meanwhile, are largely opposed to calling witnesses, believing a quick trial is the best way to avoid further fallout from the impeachment drama. Now, the Senate doesn't call witnesses in impeachment. That's not a thing. The point is that if you felt like you had overwhelming evidence in the House and you passed it, what are we going to add over here? Why didn't you do it over there, kind of thing? And that's where Adam Schiff was like, we didn't want to wait. It's too urgent. But where Mitch McConnell's like, what are you talking about? I think the wording he used is, we're not going to do their homework for them. It's like if you felt like you had enough information to send it over to us, it's not our job to do this. That's why the Senate doesn't do these witnesses. That's not what happens. That's the House's job. So the point is, all right, so all of that brings us up to speed, is that basically they're, outlets like CNN, MSNBC that have been saying, just covering what Nancy Pelosi has said is, she's right. She's right to want to wait for this to be a fair trial, like it's a trial. They had on Joe Kennedy like 2 days ago, parrot that crap to say. And basically all of the non-mainstream media, so I'm not talking about just conservatives like Daily Wire, Federalist, or anything like that, but people in the center left, center right have said, this is stupid, this doesn't make any sense, why is she doing this? And pretty much everyone else, other than the kind of that CNN, NPR crowd, has said, this is dumb, doesn't make any sense, Nancy Pelosi's an idiot for doing this, etc., etc., etc. So I think that is so narrow and like just a really low resolution way of looking at what Pelosi did here. And I'm going to explain why, and really just kind of want to nerd out on why I think this is interesting. So feel free to fast forward if you want, but I actually think this is really fascinating, even though I don't agree, but I think it's super interesting. So as soon as the inquiry was announced, the line that you heard, again, mostly from the, alternative, whether it's conservatives or even people like Joe Rogan, whatever, were saying, quote, we all know how this is going to go. They will pass it in the House, and they will acquit in the Senate, and then it'll be done, and we'll move on to 2020. So there's a problem with that. Everyone said, everyone knows how this is going to go. So here's the question. Was that correct? Was that correct? Did anyone expect Pelosi to do this? No. No one expected that. And because it was confusing, well, that's stupid. This is stupid. Now, I think that this extends the gamble that she was already making with impeachment, but I don't think this hurts her. And I'll give kind of a metaphor for why I think that this is it's actually a really interesting. So there's this ancient battle that I find super interesting. I'm not like an ancient warfare historian guy, but there are a few things. I think there's something interesting no matter what domain it's in, then I like it. I think it's interesting. One of those is this ancient battle called the Battle of Alesia, that Julius Caesar, it was whenever he was fighting against the Gauls and the Gallic army, and the leader of the Gauls was a guy named Vercingetorix. I wish he had a shorter name, because I'm going to say Vercingetorix a lot during this explanation, but that was his name. So Julius Caesar was sieging the Gallic capital at Alesia, and he was, Vercingetorix retreats back to his fortified position, right? And there's a couple options that Caesar has here, okay? So Vercingetorix knows he has reinforcements coming. They're coming. And so he knows that here's what Julius Caesar can do here. He can try to siege Alesia and get it done as quickly as possible, and hopefully before the Gallic reinforcements come at his back. So that's the first thing. The other thing Caesar can do is siege and just hope that he can also fight the Gallic reinforcements that are coming, and as well as siege Vercingetorix in Alesia. Okay, so he has a problem where he's going to be on the wrong end of a pincer maneuver. So he's taking that into account. So he can try to deal with that. He can surrender, or he can just retreat and try to live to fight another day. So that's what Vercingetorix is kicking around in his mind. He knows, I have the advantage of this fortified position. He has to come to me, and these are his options. So what Julius Caesar does, and I'll link a video that explains this. The animation's really crude, but it's fascinating. It does the job of understanding what happened here. Is Caesar clears out just huge quantities of forest, and he builds a 2-story fence around the capital, around Alesia. A 2-story, not fence, wall, a 2-story wall, fortified wall. And then he builds another wall at his back. So he creates a ring. So if this is Alesia, he builds a wall around it, and then he has this kind of inner area, and then he has another 2-story wall. So he creates his own fortified. In other words, he creates another option for himself. His opponent thought he knew what his options were. Did that and created another option for himself. I'm going to Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, and a lot of times he hammers home this idea of optionality. And the more options you have available is usually the difference between the winners and the losers. And even like in battles of skill, so like chess, for example, options available, the better player knows more of those options and knows how to execute those, whereas the worst player, he can do those things, he just doesn't know what they are and doesn't know how to execute them. So a lot of times it comes down to options. The point is that Caesar created another option, and in that video, the guy who was describing the battle, he runs kind of the strategy there and this Caesar's strategy generally, and I think it has some concentric circles with what's happening with Pelosi here with this thing. So he says Caesar, one of the things he did was that he focused on advantages and disadvantages that so he would steal the opponent's advantage out from under him. So in the battle, Vercingetorix is in this fortified position, and Caesar says, no, you don't get to have that, I have that. Now if you want out, you have to siege me. So he steals that advantage right out from under Vercingetorix. Another thing that he did was that he would delegate roles to people so he could focus on bigger issues. So the things that Julius Caesar would ask is he would say, where does my enemy have an advantage and how can I mitigate that? How am I strong and how can I maximize that? How can I make the enemy tired? How can I make sure they have the sun in their eyes? How can I make them miss breakfast? How can I make them fight in the mud? In other words, he would take a situation and squeeze every conceivable advantage out of it until there was nothing left. And then he would just roll the dice and see what happened. So I'm not saying that Nancy Pelosi is Julius Caesar here, okay? That's not what I'm saying. But the point is that who were paying attention to this thing said, we all know what's going to happen. And then she did something that none of us predicted, right? She created another option for herself. Now, it might pay off. It might not. But if your opponent or someone does something that you didn't predict and you can't immediately tell what the advantage of it is, I think it's really foolish to dismiss that action. So in my view, what she did here was she extended the gamble. The gamble was, we're going to extend the chaos, and the 2020 election is just going to be about who people blames for the chaos. Do the voters blame the Democrats for the chaos, or do they blame Trump for the chaos? There's totally valid arguments to be made on both sides. So she extends that gamble with the impeachment thing and says, okay, right now, the time when this happened, so this, a couple weeks ago, all of the attention was on the Republicans. And it was kind of a foregone conclusion what was going to happen in the Senate, right? That's why people said we all know how this is going to go. People had a pre-existing framework of what they were expecting out of Mitch McConnell in the Senate. So, what did she do? She created another option that they have to respond to that reframes the way that we think about what's going to happen in the Senate. Now, again, it's totally dishonest. It's not the Republicans' job to call witnesses. Everything. In other words, Mitch McConnell, everything he's saying is right, but it doesn't really matter because one of the things. So whenever Caesar, he would say, "What are my advantages? What are my strengths? And how can I maximize?" Well, Nancy Pelosi knows that one of her strengths is that whatever she says is going to be parroted in a lot of times in the main. Agree or disagree with that? Find me one panel on CNN that was highly critical of this move, and I will position on the spot. But so far, NPR, MSNBC, CNN, NBC, all of those have just been parroting this uncritically, and so they've been the way that people think about the process in the Senate instead of this foregone conclusion of, well, they're just going to quit. They add a new dynamic that shifts the spotlight from where it was, which was on the Democrats in the House, to the Republicans in the Senate. And they've created this new criteria that no one expected. Well, no, we need to make sure this is going to be fair. Again, it's totally dishonest and ridiculous, but it's brilliant because we didn't expect it. No one expected it. And it forces the Republicans to have to react to it. And it reframes it. And she was able to do this right before the holidays, whenever no one's, doing anything politically anyway. And so it allows some time, it puts some distance in the American public's mind between, and allows kind of this new framework to set in of, oh, well, it needs to be a fair trial, and it puts the spotlight on the Republicans. Now, again, it might not matter. I literally don't know how Mitch McConnell can handle this. I don't think the House can just sit on this indefinitely. Like, they can't wait till after the election or anything, for example. I don't know. I really don't know. And so that's what we're figuring out. But the point is that we don't know. All of the foregone conclusions are out the window. They could end up being right in the long run, but they're not right now. So that's the point. And so I think that we, at the very least, have to give Nancy Pelosi a tremendous amount of credit for creating this other option so that all that talk of we all know how this is going to go, again, might be right in the long term, but it's not right now. And I don't think it hurts her. Again, I think it extends out the gamble, which is keep this in the news, keep the chaos in the news. So maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. But I don't think it's going to hurt her. I think that there's the opportunity to reframe this whole thing around Mitch McConnell and the Republicans as opposed to this kind of haphazard, hit job or, whatever is a totally ridiculous clown show in the House of Representatives. It's now reframed around Mitch McConnell. And so by allowing that to happen, I think it's really brilliant. So we'll see how that plays out. But again, I think that it's so naive to just dismiss that as stupid. Nancy Pelosi is a skilled politician. She knows what she's doing. And she created an option here that no one saw coming. So kudos to her for doing that. I never thought it'd be Nancy Pelosi doing something partisan and dishonest that actually got me super interested in this, because I just think that generally it deserves a tremendous amount of credit. Okay, so I'm done nerding out about that. So we'll see what happens. I have no idea, but that's what's interesting about it, is I don't know, and you don't know, and no one knows. So, okay, so here's where we're going to talk about the worrying trends that I see going into, and then we'll talk about the optimistic stuff and so on and so forth. I I spent a long time coming up with all these like examples of like this that all kind of feed the same underlying point. So I'm going to not spend near as much time on the stuff that I painstakingly researched and typed out, although I will include all of it in the description for those of you that are interested. And the articles that I am referencing here will be in my sources as well. If I were to say there's a kind of a general trend, there's maybe two things. I'm going to give kind of an anecdote that you, because the specifics do matter. And the issue is this trend of weaponizing identity to obtain compliance or get people to, obtain compliance, get people to agree with you or vote how you want, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I mean by that is weaponizing identity. So if you're a female, if you are not, non-white, if you're of a ethnic minority or a certain, sexual minority demographic, homosexual, trans, whatever. So weaponizing these traits and using it as a way to bludgeon people into compliance if they have differing views from you, if they don't check all the boxes politically. And so I'm going to give an example about feminism, and I'll hit on some of these other examples, then we'll bring it back to how that feeds. So Huffington Post put out this article about a week ago. It said it was like, feminism was, in the 2010s, feminism was trendy, and then it got angry. And it's this whole thing about how feminism evolved, particularly in the age of Trump or whatever, and just kind of what they say it is now and why this is important and why we should be optimistic. This is what we need to be doing as feminists, right? And they give examples of celebrities that, gave what they would say a lackluster answer on what is feminism, or said they weren't feminists, or spoke about it maybe pejoratively. And one of the articles they cite is from a magazine called Bustle, and it's an article from 2013. I forgot what celebrity it was talking about, but it said basically this celebrity, if they don't want to be a feminist, that's fine, but they need to at least know what it is. And so this article from Bustle, I'm going to read what their definition of feminism is in 2013, and then I'll read the definition that Huffington Post gives in 2019, and see if we can spot the differences here. So from Bustle, feminism means equality in the workplace. Feminism means equal treatment of women in political systems. Feminism means fighting against rape and sexual harassment and fighting for sexual consent. Yeah. Feminism means letting women make their own choices about their bodies, their careers, and their personal lives. Feminism means partnering with men. Many feminists love the systemic patriarchy that hurts both men and women. That's a pretty 2013 definition, sure, that's fine. But this is how it ends. Feminism means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but primarily it means treating women just like any other human being. Controversial. There's a few specifics in there, that obviously I might differ on, particularly with probably some of the abortion stuff or this idea of the systemic patriarchy, but whatever. That it primarily means treating women like any other human being. That's a totally non-controversial statement. That's something we should all agree to as a good definition of feminism. Not just feminism, just how every decent person should think, right? We should all believe that women should be treated just decently, just like any other human being. So that's 2013. So this is Huffington Post, 2019, from like a week ago. Quote, yes, feminism is ultimately about equality for people of gender identities. But perhaps more importantly, it's about defining what that vision of equality will look like and what pathways are required to get there, which, time out, if you're defining equality, it's not equality of, it's something different. You don't have to define equality. We know what equality is. It's about legislation and the courts and elections and knocking on doors and protesting in the streets and joining a union and protecting the most vulnerable among us, even if you are not a member of that group. And for many celebrities who take it on, the word itself has been reduced to its most benign interpretation, the idea that men and women ought to be equal. And then Donald Trump was elected. You can't get away with a stupid, pithy definition of feminism and expect to get a cookie for it anymore. You have to be able to speak about it in a more educated, thoughtful, action-based way, or everyone is going to come for you. This feedback loop can be used to shame celebrities into more responsible engagement with political issues, and can also be a means of education itself. So did you notice the difference? The one in 2013 is saying primarily it's just about treat women like decent human beings, treat them equally. From 29 or from just a week ago, they're saying, no, feminism is a political identity. It's really. They say, well, yeah, sure, I guess it has that. But more importantly, it's about defining equality, which, okay, red flags. If someone says, let's define fairness, or, if we're going to go out to eat and I say, hey, let's split the bill equally, and you say, well, let's define what splitting it equally means. I would say, what are you talking about? This is a pretty, cut and dry thing. But so that you're using a different definition there. So they say we're going to define equality, but mainly it's about legislation and courts and voting. It's a political thing. Feminism is a political thing. So being a woman, being for women's equality or gender equality, as they say here, is a political identity. And what they say here is that it's not just, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but they say you can't just be neutral. That same article talks about how Taylor Swift, how to encourage people to vote in 2016, but she didn't endorse a candidate. And they talk about how she was shamed, and then she comes out later and says, you know what, I think differently about these things now. So literally they give this dystopian view of shaming people and re-educating themselves, and then Taylor Swift is like, I have been successfully re-educated. It's pretty gross is that they're making this about a political thing when really it shouldn't be. And they literally call that idea that men and women should be treated equally a, quote, stupid and pithy definition. So they say, no, that's not the definition. Here's a definition, and you need to act it out. It needs to be action-based, right? Thoughtful. You have to be doing this stuff, or people are going to come for you. And what is doing this stuff? Well, it's legislation, courts, elections, knocking on doors, all this other stuff. It's a political. So the point is, and by the way, later on, at the very end of the article, they say one reason to be optimistic about feminism is that Jane Fonda keeps getting arrested at climate change protests. It's like, okay, so we're not even on gender stuff anymore. We're at climate change. Again, it's a political thing, which is it's gross because it detracts from what it should originally be about, what it has been about historically, which is just women's equality. Treat people decently. Everyone should be treated the same. They say, no, we're going to redefine this and make this about politics. And you're not a good feminist woman if you don't vote the way we want you to vote. So that's what I mean. That's an example of that weaponizing of identity to use as a bludgeon against people that disagree. And so that I have other examples in here of that. Examples of, The Guardian writing about, like, what's wrong with Republicans. Got examples of, Advocate magazine in 2016 wrote a piece about how Peter Thiel isn't gay. He's just a guy that likes to have sex with other men, but gay is a cultural and political identity, and so Peter Thiel's not actually gay, even though he's attracted to other dudes and he has sex with dudes, but he's not gay because gay is a political thing. And then I'll talk about her here in a second, but Ellen and George W. Bush, how all these think pieces. Ellen, she betrayed her identity. She betrayed lesbianism. She betrayed the left by saying be nice to George W. Bush. So again, those are identity things. There's stuff from The Root where this has happened with race, with the Roots of publication, where they've said, Kanye's not black or Candace Owens isn't black. And if you look at the comments on some of these articles, they're horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. A couple articles I had in here, I will never forgive white people for Donald Trump. And there's this normalizing of this idea. Here's a quote from this. While not all white people has become the canonical cliched reply to this sort of charge, it's also not false. Not all white people voted for Trump. Not all white people support Trump. And sometimes it feels wildly unfair to lump all in with the undesirables. But being fair to white people feels, irrational today. So it's literally a case for prejudice and for stereotyping. It's actual racism. Like, why would I'm not going to the good ones in with the bad ones, but it's all the same at this point. So that's a weaponizing of race. They also wrote an article last year called Donald Trump Has a Nose for Trash Black People. So they're like ripping on black people that support Trump, how they have turned away from their blackness. They've lost their black card. This particular article says that Trump has a nose for trash black people. He's a canary in a trash can. He's the Pied Piper for putrid N-words. As a black guy, how he's writing in that particular piece. And they talk about the silly church-going Negroes that break bread with him and stuff. And they say that, it's good that he attracts all these trash and see what they are. And so the point is there's all this weaponizing of identity. I can get into the specifics of all of this. What I really want to focus on is that is feeding called a strategy, lack of, but there is a corrosion that's taken place in our public discourse, and that weaponizing of identity to bludgeon people with, oh, you're not actually black if you don't vote this way, you're not actually a lesbian, you're not actually a woman, you're not actually gay, whatever, if you don't vote this way. It all feeds this really corroded way that we're handling our discourse right now, and just the absolute crumbling of civility, the ability to agree to disagree, basically. And so I'm not going to go at these really long excerpts. Instead, what I decided to do was 3 quotes from 3 mainstream articles that talk about mainstream issues over the last couple of years. This sentiment of what I am absolutely terrified of and what I'm most worried about for our society now and going into the future, whether 5G, it's the good stuff. Anyway, whether it's now or going into the future, okay? So this is what I'm really worried about. Here's these 3 quotes, all right? So the first one, I talked about the response to It Chapter 2. I think I've read this quote before. It's important. It's worth reading through again. So this is in a review of It Chapter 2. So if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert. But, quote, thus the film's conclusion reveals itself as a metaphor for social media, age of Twitter and Tumblr. Those who were once losers have found their voice. They now shout down the shamers and the scolds. They've learned to use the power of bullying for their own ends, demanding that those who have wronged them be punished for their sins. The mob of the marginalized hunts evildoers one bad tweet at a time, cuts them down to size, eventually ripping out their hearts, stamping out the evil of prejudice, just as the Losers Club stamped out the evil of, child-eating space clowns. So the next time someone tells you an outrage mob can't do any good, just remind them of It Chapter 2. You never know when a mob of the marginalized will come in handy. So they're giving this defense and saying, since it was good that these kids murdered this child-eating space clown, it's also good that we engage in online mobbing of people and shouting them down, destroying them one bad tweet at a time, for their prejudice. What's the problem? The problem with that is we all objectively agree an evil space-eating or an evil child-eating clown from outer space is bad. Driving in the real world is all subjective and just how you would treat people that disagree with you. And they're saying, no, it's good to use what they say, the power of bullying for their own ends. And they engage, a mob of the marginalized can come in handy. They can do good. So this is advocating for these online mobs, shouting down people, silencing people over disagreements. So here's the next one. This is a piece from Vox about what happened with Ellen and George W. Bush. All right. So again, to recap, she was seen at a football game. She was in a box where George W. Bush and his wife happened to be sitting, and so Ellen sat next to him. People got mad at her, and she said, "Hey, be nice to people, even if you disagree with a good thing. I say that. I mean it. Be nice to everyone, even those you disagree with." And she got raked over the coals for that. So here's a piece from Vox about that. Quote, in many ways, it feels as though niceness is no longer enough, as though it might perhaps even be slightly immoral. In this age of Donald Trump and Me Too and apocalyptic climate change and gun violence and all the other things that make our future seem even more uncertain, and as those in power are ever more unqualified to help us, do we even want to be nice to the powerful anymore? Is uncritical niceness to people who have made the world a worse place a good and admirable thing? And that's, again, it's really worrying because all Ellen was saying is that there's a principle of how you treat people, of just fundamental human decency. Even if you disagree with them, you still baseline level with human. And Vox is saying, no, that actually might be immoral to do because we disagree on policies about gun violence or climate change. So being nice to people you disagree with is immoral. You know, what's about that, by the way, is, you know, that's a principle there that we abstract circumstances. You know, there's a reason the Geneva Convention exists, and that there are rules how you treat prisoners of war, and that even if we're at war and there's someone who was shooting at you 10 minutes ago, if they surrender, happens, and you take them hostage, decency, or else the world's going to come for you in a good sense because you violated these rules of engagement, and you've committed war crimes. That's what it is. And you know, it's the same people that would say, well, we can't torture people at Guantanamo Bay, you know, because they have human dignity, are saying, well, but if we disagree with them on policy and there's some, you know, kind of we have some skin in the game when it comes to how they might vote, then being nice is immoral. Extending human decency is immoral. And living by those principles is immoral. And that's really terrifying to me, to be totally honest with you. And so this is the last piece that kind of highlights this. This is from a article from the University of Oklahoma, wrote an essay called Righteous Incivility. And the thoughts, like this essay and her thinking and this kind of philosophy that's starting to take root, particularly on the far left, this is popular stuff. This is well accepted scholarship. These ideas generally, and this is where you see the academic side of the two things I just read. So it's about righteous incivility. So, all right. Quote, "My sneering contempt for your terrible moral outlook might not stop you, but maybe my disdain can slow you down or discourage others from doing like you do. This, then, is where temptation is at its greatest. There are many who do not so much succumb, but actively embrace it. The world at present is not just full of rude people. It's full of people being rude because they judge it to be righteous. I feel the pull, but I have doubts. I believe that righteous incivility is sometimes better than civility, and that it can indicate a pattern of reasoning we morally need." So they're saying there, look, we have a disagreement. So what's important here is whether it's I think that chapter 2 review is out of Washington Post, I'm pretty sure, is that they're using subjective terms for action. So they're saying, if your terrible moral outlook, or you're engaged in this type of behavior, you vote this way, or, you know, I disagree with you on policy, but we should embrace this righteous incivility because it indicates a pattern of reasoning we morally need. And that's what Vox said. Being nice is immoral. So what's the implication there? Well, being unkind is moral. And that's what here. This is a scholarship that undergirds that weaponizing of identity playing into this stuff is that what happened, and this is what I said after the fallout with the Ellen and the George W. Bush stuff, with all the people that went after her in a way that was totally unfair and totally unwarranted and totally unjustified, is that what we learned from that is that we had entered a new stage of just corroded and decaying discourse. Whereas previously it was, there's this side and there's this side, and we're going to lob attacks at each other, and there's going to be ad hominem, and there's going to be dishonesty and personal attacks, whatever. But what we entered there is, if someone on our own side says, hey, we need to at least be nice or reasonable or extend human decency, disagree with, not even agreeing with them, just saying we need to be decent. It's not agreeing. It's just agreeing to fundamental principles. Then that person on our own side is fair game, and the targets or the crosshairs can move right over to them just for advocating for human decency and kindness. And that is what undergirds that weaponizing of identity and that shaming people because they disagree, based on that feminist article from Huffington Post. And that's what I'm most worried about, is that there is an absolutely toxic trajectory that we're heading on socially, there's this rift that's just widening and widening and widening, to where people are trying to argue on the specifics of policy, whether it's immigration or abortion or healthcare or whatever, but the arguments aren't actually about immigration or healthcare or abortion or whatever. The arguments are about who I think you are as my ideological opponent and who I think my side is. And it's this moral hodgepodge of nonsense that has nothing to do with the outcomes of these policies or extending goodwill to the other side. It's a zero-sum thing. If I'm moral and I know my policy is moral and right, then you who disagree must be immoral and wrong, and I'm justified in being unkind and being uncivil and shaming you and shouting you down and all this other stuff. And so I can harp on this forever. I'm not going to, as tempting as it is, but the issue is we don't even agree on how to disagree anymore. And so having arguments about specific policy issues when we can't even agree to the rules of those disagreements, and we can't even go into it saying, I'm going to extend goodwill to you, I'm going to assume that you want good things or you care, so one of the things that happens with the gun conversation is always like, well, you just don't care, or if you're pro-life or anti-abortion, well, you hate women. Or if you're pro-abortion, you hate babies or whatever. You don't care. And the arguments are framed about this, what I think about what you are as the person who disagrees with me. And we can't even get to the substance of a disagreement if we go, it is just fundamentally evil at their core. And so that's a problem. There's a bigger problem of being encouraged to use those tactics. And that's what's happening in the media. That's what these articles are indicating, is that there are people who are always going to engage in that kind of toxic discourse, right? That's always going to happen. But the question is, how influential are they? And like, how much is that rebuked, or how much is that criticized and tacitly supported? And in the wake of that stuff with Ellen, all of these other, identity things, is it's being supported, it's being promulgated, it's being propped up as a legitimate strategy to win because it's zero-sum in the minds of a lot of people right now. And so that's what I'm most terrified about going into 2020, is that we can't even agree on what the rules of the game are. We can't even agree on how to disagree. So arguments about policy and specifics are so, we can't get there unless we can agree on how to be civil with each other and actually have conversations. That's the main thing, and that has to stop, obviously, but that's the main thing I'm worried about. So here's what I'll say that I am optimistic about after going into that deep hole of total cynicism that I experience when I think about our social fabric ripping apart. Anyway, so reasons to be optimistic. There's a few things. So the first, I'll kind of say, strange alliances generally. There's kind of a realigning ideologically, or some shifts that are taking place. Some shifts. I don't know why I said it like that. But there are some changes happening there. Then I'll kind of talk about what I mean specifically, what's happening here. So an example I would say is so there's Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. I've talked about them before. They wrote this book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. Great book, highly recommend it. So these are guys who were in the kind of the new atheist movement in the early 2000s, very antagonistic, highly critical of religion, Christianity specifically. I think Boghossian wrote a book called A Manual. So these are guys who are of religion and Christianity specifically, but in the last year and a half, they've found alliances and found connections and common ground with groups of evangelical Christians in the fight against some of this, kind of intersectional, not fact-based, insidious scholarship that they've been fighting against for the last couple of years. And so they've found some alliances there. And so if these, part of the new atheist movement are saying, we can set our differences aside with people we disagree with on policy because we agree on principle, and form this alliance to fight this bigger threat, that's pretty encouraging. So there's these strange alliances happening. And I'll give some examples and then kind of bring it back to why that encourages me. So I don't talk a lot about, this is another thing that I'm optimistic for. Kind of. I don't talk a lot about transgender stuff on this podcast. I have an ever-growing Google Doc that has all of articles and journal articles and stuff that addresses that. But what I will say is that one thing I am encouraged by is that the way that there are certain women in women's sports and competition that are starting to speak up against the I guess just the issue of allowing biological males to compete in women's competition. And kind of a metaphor I give is that, there's a movie that I really love called Stranger Than Fiction. Highly recommend it. It's got Will Ferrell in it, and he's a boring accountant guy, and all of a sudden he finds his life is being narrated, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. He goes to this literary professor played by Dustin Hoffman, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what type of story is this? Who's the author? How do we deal with this crazy situation? And one of the pieces of advice Hoffman gives him is he says, okay, here's what we're going to try now. We've tried some of these other things. Don't do anything. Don't do anything. Don't go to work. Don't do anything. Just sit in your apartment. And he explains, he says, sometimes the main character drives the story. And Hoffman says, if I go through that door, I'm driving the story. That's the story of me going through the door. So the story is compelled by my actions. There's another situation where the main character doesn't drive the plot, and the plot finds them. And so what he tells Will Ferrell is he says, look, if you're driving the story and you sit at home, nothing will happen because you are the one who is driving the events here. If you don't, or if you are not the one who's driving it, the plot will come and find you. In other words, something will happen that you are forced to react to. That just being idle and just continuing in this current trajectory is going to force a reaction because of these other things. And so there are ways in which I think that we as a society, if you were to look at just where we're at, with our just trends socially, culturally, whatever, that we can drive the story. So those would be elections, those would be just changing the way we treat each other, things like that. Those are ways in which we can drive the plot forward. But there are a few things that I would say are, if we maintain status quo of how things are, all the current trends stay the way they are, there are some events where the plot will find us, where we will be forced to react because of the status quo right now isn't dealing with that. And so it's creating a future thing we have to respond to. So an example that a lot of people would feel about that would be climate change, right? So they're saying we have to change, we have to do something differently, because if we continue down this road, it's going to be really bad for us. Of course, so that'd be an example. Another example would be like the insolvency of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those types of things. That is going to happen here within the next, I think, 6 years. So that'll force a reaction just because of the financial reality of it. So that'll be an example of the plot finding us. And another example that I think is the increase of biological men in women's competitions that are just destroying records and are just winning these competitions all over the globe. Sustainable, and that it's not the threshold of patience for women who have busted their butts to get to the top of their class, to the top of their competition abilities, just to have a biological male come in and destroy them, that's not sustainable. That will force a reaction, and we're already starting to see some of that happen. There's people speaking out about the 2020 Olympics is going to allow transgender females, which is a biological male, to compete as long as they have less than 10, I forgot what units of measurement they use, but 10 of testosterone. Already around 3 times more than what the average female has anyway, so they have an advantage there. But having those testosterone levels, and they have to have had it for a year, but that does nothing to address the changes that took place in puberty, which is where you see the divergence in the way that in men's competition times and records and stuff. And so having the testosterone suppressed does nothing to address, the bone structure, the muscles, men have bigger heart, all this other stuff. And so there's people that are speaking out about it. That's what J.K. Rowling got in trouble for, right? Just a couple weeks ago, she tweeted out in support of a woman who was fired for saying there is a difference biologically between males and females. And J.K. Rowling said, look, love who you want to love, dress how you want to dress, live your own life, that's fine. but don't try to get a woman fired for saying something that's true, which is their biological, a dimorphic species sexually. There are biological differences between males and females, but don't get someone fired. J.K. Rowling got totally shellacked, just like what happened with Ellen, right? She was shamed and was saying, because she said, look, there's biological differences. And this is a person who has been far left for a long time, but they said, oh, she's transphobic because she said that. And the point is that this is unsustainable, and you're already starting to see some pushback. There's a lawsuit, I think it's pending, on the East Coast with these high school track athletes, these women or these girls are in high school, and they're saying, look, we want to get scholarships, but coaches, people, like, they only look at names and times. So if I got fifth, they don't know that, 2 of the 4 people in front of me were biological males. It doesn't matter. And so this is hurting my abilities to compete, and it affects my, college prospects, my ability to get a scholarship, etc. So there's a lawsuit happening there, and there's a group, it's called TERFs, it's Trans Revolutionary Radical Feminists, and, very rarely would I think that I would be very encouraged by radical feminists, but TERFs are standing up and saying, look, like, we've fought really hard for women to advance to this point, for us to have these competitions, and for us to have our own thing, and to allow these biological males to come in is absurd. There's former Olympic athletes who are speaking out against this, and they're meeting a lot of resistance, but it's not slowing down, it's increasing. And so, I kind of in that vein of strange alliances, is that there are radical feminists and people like Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and evangelical Christians and conservatives and stuff that are finding common ground based on principles and based on objective issues and a desire to adhere to what is true and what is basically principled. And one thing I've said to people whenever I talk about this is I say, look, there is nothing more effective and more intimidating than a group of pissed off and well-organized women. And that sounds hyperbolic, but I really mean that. And if you think that's an exaggeration, if you think that's a stretch, consider the fact that the temperance movement, which was mainly females, succeeded in getting alcohol outlawed in the United States before securing women's rights to vote. Check it. The Volstead Act, which was the amendment, came before the 19th Amendment, which was women's suffrage. So a bunch of women got the United States to say, yeah, we're going to outlaw alcohol, which everyone loves, before they even got their own rights to vote. Like, that's how effective a group of well-organized and pissed-off women is. So I don't think that it's exaggerated at all to say that who have had their records beat by Fallon Fox, who is the male-to-female MMA fighter, breaks a girl's skull in the first fight. I think Britain just had a cyclist that won. It was a national or international cycling championship, was a biological male. Same thing's happening with weightlifting, etc. It never happens the other way, right? There's not these female-to-male, competitors that are just crushing the offensive line in college football. It's not the point is that's unsustainable. That's a thing where I think the plot's going to find us. And the rise of TERFs and the rise of females that are saying, look, like, we do want to treat people with dignity. And this is the problem, right? Like, there's a lot of people who look at the trans issue and think it's just about, like, well, they just want me to call pronoun. Like, what's the big deal? And fair enough. If it was just that, that's a different conversation. But they're forgetting about all of the externalities, like these competition. There are girls that are saying, look, this is unfair. This is unfair. Why should I be penalized because I don't have a biological man's body? Like, these are things to consider, and it's tough, but I'm encouraged by the fact that they're absolutely not. Like, this is weird. I'm not going to do this. One thing I'm encouraged by, radical feminist, I guess, in a way. So that's cool. I didn't think I'd ever say that. Another thing that I'm encouraged by that I think it is a glimmer of hope to look forward to in 2020 is just big tech is crumbling and new tech is starting to rise up. And, we live in a free market system. If there is a demand for something, then a supply will come about to meet that demand, typically. And, as old media has died, which is, CNN and NBC and just main TV news media, We've seen a rise of YouTube and Twitter and all this other stuff. But big tech has also started to run kind of monolithic, imposing thing. And there's still a lot of people basically that blame Donald Trump winning the election of 2016 on Facebook and on social media bias and stuff like that. And so Google, which is an activist in a lot of ways in the way they operate, their searches are very heavily skewed. This has been known for a long time. Google has changed, so Google owns YouTube. They've changed the terms of conditions of YouTube gearing up towards 2020, where they're saying we can delete your account if it's not financially viable. So any account, if they say, oh, well, we don't think this is financially viable, any videos, anything, we'll just delete it. So that's obviously worrisome. Twitter has said, look, we're not going to do political ads, and they're banning people off of Twitter in a fairly partisan kind of way. It seems to skew in one direction. There's a lot of pressure being put on Facebook to censor and to fact check or whatever, and this gets into the publisher versus platform debate. But the point is that there are people who are fed up and are kind of sick of the media that we have now and are wanting something new. They're desperately wanting some alternatives. And so that's seeing the rise of, I mentioned earlier, Dave Rubin launched his website, rubinreport.com, a couple months ago. That's when we're on, and it's just conversations, people just talking, posting content. It's just people, it's free minds. It's like breathing fresh air, after being in like a smoky. When I was in high school and there was an area where there's the smoking section and non-smoking. And even just that small distance of walking from one side of the room to the other is noticeable. You can breathe more, and you just want to take like a breath of fresh air. And being on a platform where people aren't, constantly walking on eggshells because they're afraid everything they say is going to be taken in the worst possible way is pretty refreshing. And that's one of the things people are looking for. Dave Rubin's website's doing that. He also just launched this website called locals.com. It's going to be a media platform for content creators. They're sifting through all of the applicants right now for that. I think there are somewhere like 5,000 something of people that want to create content on there. So I'm excited about that. Jordan Peterson's website, ThinkSpot, is in beta right now. The people I've talked to who are on there say it's pretty cool. It's that kind of breath of fresh air. People of free thinkers. There's a streaming website. It's kind of like YouTube called BitChute. Scott Adams is on there. Owen Benjamin. It's got alternative media people. I'm not as sold on BitChute, but I'm glad. It's got a little more alt-right presence than I'm comfortable with. It's like there's always going to be a few crazies, but I don't know. Maybe BitChute, maybe I'll come around to it, but right now, but I'm glad it's there. The point is I'm glad that there's alternative media propping up. And so I'm excited about that the free markets are answering the call of, look, we're worried about YouTube, we're worried about big tech censorship, and so we need something different. And so I'm excited for the new tech and the way it's bringing people together in the vein of some of these strange alliances that I was talking about. So here's the last thing, and that is just kind of in the vein of what I mentioned earlier and what I've been hammering home consistently, is that the Democratic Party needs to address the problem of the radicals that it has in it, of the far left, of the Twitter people, and again, address and first accept and then address in a substantive way the incompatibility of these visions of governance they've allowed. Again, Nancy Pelosi has more in common in terms of vision of governance with Donald Trump than she does with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's just true. And so I am encouraged by the fact that people in the Democrat establishment that are waking up to that. So whether it's Barack Obama talking, being more vocal about not going too far left, S.E. Cupp, just venting her frustration, and that crystal ball saying, look, they just want to elect the president of Progressivia, or Chris Matthews on MSNBC has been highly critical of some of the far left stuff that's been going on. Like that is a good thing. That's a needed thing. I don't know, if they'll get the momentum they need to really do it effectively before, that part of their party has gained ascendancy. I don't know, but I'm glad that it's happening. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I'm glad that it's happening, that they're waking up to this, I call it flow, far left orthodoxy, and waking up to the fact that this is incompatible. This isn't what I signed up for as a Democrat. and that it's happening in the establishment. Now, again, I don't know if they'll be able to effectively root it out, but I'm glad it's happening. So all of those are examples, whether it's the radical feminists, atheists and evangelicals, people meeting on new media, etc., is that there is a shift happening here, a realignment on ideology that's kind of happening. And I've heard Rubin talk about this, I've heard Rogan talk about it, and others, but I'm excited about it, and it's continuing to happen. And this is where I think if there's a reason to be optimistic that people might do something to move this thing in the right direction, this is where it's going to come from. So we're used to thinking about things on the left-right spectrum, like if you're on the far left or on the far right, whatever, of that political, Democrat, Republican, that type of, liberal or conservative, whatever. But people are starting to understand that there's another axis at play here, and that is the axis of authoritarian and libertarian. So that basically is, how much control do you want the government to have over your life, to put policies in place that restrict you, that limit you, whatever. And there are people on the far left and far right on policy that are coming together and saying, we disagree on policy, but we agree on principle, and that principle is that we can coexist, where I'm not forcing you to think how I want to think, and you're not forcing me to think how you want to think. So there's alliances happening where there's this new middle where the policies where they can say, yeah, we'll disagree on that, and that can be handled on a local or state level, but we agree on the principles. We agree on just how the game needs to be played. And so I'm encouraged by that new center that's kind of forming, that's based on individual liberty, that's based on principles of charity and all this other stuff that I've mentioned. And it's happening as, again, people like Sam Harris, who's pretty far left, he hates Donald Trump, but he can speak well of someone like Ben Shapiro because they agree on a lot of the fundamentals of just the way it should be done. So, Eric Weinstein, pretty far left guy, Brett Weinstein, his brother, pretty far left guy, etc. And people on the far right, like Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro. And, we say the far right, but that's really more mainstream right. But the point is that there's a new center forming that's based on principle over policy, and this kind of agreement to disagree and just have these conversations and not walk on eggshells all the time. So I'm really excited by that. If there is any, that by the way, that group is growing, and that's why I love the new tech, the new media outlets that are springing up, because it allows opportunities for people like me and the people who've been doing this for a while, like a Dave Rubin or an Eric Weinstein, to engage with those free thinkers and get their message out there, and people who can say we agree to disagree. So that is optimistic about, is the coalescence of that group, of that new center, who are saying, look, I don't want to legislate my subjective morality. I don't want you to legislate your subjective morality. Let's just agree to disagree. So that's where I think that we're going to, if we are going to dig ourselves out of this hole, that's where it's going to come from. So here's I'll close this out. It's been pretty long. Kind of what I would say by possible scenarios for 2020. And I have 5, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's so speculative. But these are the things that I could see basically that could happen politically, all right? And I don't think this matters because all of this is informed by where we're at socially. But so scenario 1, 2020, Republicans win the presidency and they keep the Senate, okay? So that happens. One scenario where that happens would be the Democrats do what the Labour Party is doing in the UK, or claims to be doing, right? They say, we're going to do some soul searching here and say, what have we allowed to fester in our party or to exist in our party that's given us such a skewed perception of what the people want, of what is good governance, etc. So if that happens and the Democrats do that, that would be amazing. Maybe it would force the radicals to create a third party. I don't think they will, but it could. I mean, that would be one option. The second scenario is the same thing, where Republicans keep Trump's reelected and they keep the Senate, but the far left says no, and they just crank up the volume. So it's kind of like if you're playing through a video game and you had it on like medium, and then you're going to say, I'm going to do another playthrough, but I'm going to put it on like expert or hardcore mode. The game's the same, the levels are the same. intense and way harder, and it's a bigger challenge. And so that's what I see as if the Republicans, if Trump's reelected and they keep the Senate, that there's a reality where there could be the far left who says, yeah, we're going to kick it into overdrive here. And so all the stuff you've seen, whether it's Covington Catholic or Brett Kavanaugh or, well, we've got kids in cages, we have a concentration camp at the border, or whatever kind of rhetoric you want to say this is a problem, attacks like what happened with Ellen, where that just gets ratcheted up to the nth degree and spirals into the point of no return. Another potential, if the Republicans win the presidency but lose the Senate. So I bring up the Senate because I think the Democrats only have like 12 Senate seats they have to defend. Republicans have something like 22, 24, something like that. So if the Republicans lose the Senate, but they win, Trump gets reelected, then that means the Democrats will have the Senate and the House of Representatives. They'll just impeach him like immediately, like that. He'll be gone, and it'll be President Pence is what they'll do. Now, how will the American people feel about that? Hard to say. But if the Republicans lose the Senate, that is what will happen. So, all right, so is that one? Two others. Republicans lose the presidency but keep the Senate. So Trump loses, but for some reason they keep their Senate seats. This is really unlikely. Again, there's like 20-something Senate seats up for grabs. If people aren't voting for Trump, they're going to downvote Democrat in those Senate races. But if they do that, my guess is that the people in the Senate will do whatever they can to block whatever the legislation is, and they'll kind of treat it like Obama in 2008, where they just try to get the House back in 2010, what the Republicans did. So they'll just look at 2020 House and hope that they can mitigate whatever damage they perceive to be done by a Democrat House and a Democrat executive. And then the last one is the Republicans lose the presidency and the Senate. So if that happens, it'll be the fourth time in U.S. history that the Democratic Party has had a supermajority, which is the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. And all three times that's happened prior to if that were to happen. The three other times has resulted in enormous expansions of government and the creation of a lot of policies that, well-intentioned as they were, I'm sure, have led to a lot of the instability we're experiencing now. So that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, some of the affirmative action stuff in the 60s, a lot of the welfare stuff where we started to see single motherhood rates skyrocket was after those things were passed under, I think it was Johnson, maybe. Could be wrong. Anyway, but the point is that whenever that's, and then in 2008 with Barack Obama with the Affordable Care Act was the third time. So if that happens, that I think is just as concerning as if Trump gets reelected and the left doesn't do any soul searching, or the far left doesn't do any soul searching. I think that's just as dangerous because that'll incentivize all of this crazy stuff that we've been talking about. That'll incentivize these policies. And so it'll be just a free-for-all of enormous blowouts and expansions of government. So I don't think that'll happen, but if it does, that's a pretty horrific scenario. But we'll see. I don't know. So obviously, like I said, those are speculative. But we can look back on this next year if there's even still a country to see if I was right. But what I will say here, and here's where I'll kind of bring this to a close. Go ahead and sum it, Mount. What's your point, right? Is after Trump was elected in 2016. I've said this before. I didn't vote for him. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I was pretty nervous about the election at that point in time, and I put a post up in response to the peaceful resolution of a conflict right after the election in 2016. So this is something I wrote in 2016, right after Trump was elected, when I was very nervous about the results of that election, okay? Here's what I said. Quote, "I understand that emotions are still high from Tuesday, but we have got to come together as a country. The election is over, and those of us who disliked the country with those who voted for this. We're all in this together, and if we keep going the way we're going, this country will end up eating itself. these protesters showed that it is possible to put the division aside for the greater good. We need to follow their example and not continue the toxic course that we're on. And so one of the things, I said that then, and I said after that, I was like, if 2020, it'll be really bad in 2018, it'll be a bloodbath in 2020, there will be violence if we keep doing this, if we keep eating ourselves, if we keep in this horrific, chaotic public discourse of just bad faith arguments and ad hominem and all this other stuff. So that's what I said in 2016, and I think that basically that warning went unheeded, and that prediction has been true so far, that we are continuing to eat ourselves, we're continuing to go down this toxic divided course. Now, of course, that's not necessarily a conclusion that will persist, but that's where I see it is right now. I don't see a fundamental difference between that sentiment that I expressed then in 2015, I guess, and what I feel now. And the prescriptions are the same, fortunately, right? And why I think all of these speculations about the elections in 2020 are pointless, and I really mean that. Like, I'll give a thoughtful guess of what I think could happen, but I also mean it when I say that's pointless, because those are all responsive to where we're at culturally, responsive to where we're at as a society. And so the negative outcomes of those elections are only dangerous to the degree in which we are divided in our social fabric and divided from each other as a country, as neighbors, as family members, as coworkers, whatever. And so none of that has to be bad if we can go back to a place where we're saying we're just going to reestablish the rules of disagreement. I might disagree with you on everything, every single thing, but I think the odds of you being a psycho who has no care whatsoever is very low. So I'm going to assume that your intentions are good, even if I think the policies are bad. That place where we disagree and agree how to disagree. Getting back to there will help us get off of that divided toxic course that I talked about in November 2015. So, that said, those are my thoughts. Those are what, I'm very pessimistic about where we are, about the way in which we engage with each other. I think we do have to reestablish the rules of the game, reestablish how we're going to disagree. But I'm optimistic that there is a new center of people forming that have different ideologies, but agree on the fundamental principles of we're going to treat each other with respect and common decency. As Ellen said, we're going to be nice to each other even if we disagree. That there's a new center forming around that, around some of that more libertarian mindset of, you do you, I'll do me, and let's just try to coexist instead of ripping each other's throats out. So that's where it stands in 2020 or in 2019. And like I said at the beginning of this, in 2020, what I have been doing, what I'm going to continue to try and do, is elevate the quality of discourse. We have enough quantity. The quantity is blowing up, and the quality is in the toilet. Whatever's below the toilet and 20 miles below that, that's where the quality is. And so I want to do my part, however small, to elevate the quality so that we are engaging in a fact-based discourse, but that's also rooted in principles of goodwill and charity and assuming the best of each other. I appreciate those of you that have joined me in this. I appreciate those of you who hopefully will join me in this. If this is something you believe in and that's something you agree with, please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Return to Reason. Follow me on Twitter, that's at My Mundane Mind. So if you're listening, please again follow me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. All of that stuff's going there, and I'm going to include links into the stuff I'm writing on Medium so you can kind of see some of the other types of stuff I'm engaging in. One thing I've said, and I'll leave it here, is that right now, too get the upper hand and destroy people, and that's what we see on Twitter. That's what we see in this pursuit of sound bites, these little 30-second viral moments. And I've said we have enough dunks. We don't need more dunks. We need dialogue. We need conversations. Open minds, not outrage mobs. I can go on with the alliterative, puns or whatever ad infinitum, but the point is that we need to elevate the discourse. We need to elevate the quality, and that's what I'm trying to do. If you feel like I'm failing in any way, please let me know. Otherwise, I appreciate you coming along with me. I hope you had a good time with your family. I hope that you have a safe and fun and festive and other whatever words that are good New Year's. and I'm just excited. Excited for what next year has in store for us, and I'm excited for you to join me in that